This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom for how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. I'm your host, Mind Body Medium Kara Lovehart, and we are in episode 2 of the series with Dr. Tony Reigle. We're talking about ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for veterans, first responders, and high needs populations. So, Dr. Tony, let's first talk about these populations. This is a vulnerable populations that face high rates of PTSD, depression, and suicide. Let's go into why traditional therapies are not working for many of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of falls back on some of the things we discussed in our first episode. That's just kind of around, some of the rigidity that occurs over repeated. So we look at thinking patterns. It's all based on the premise that our thinking is a neuropathway, the way we think. When we have a thought, when we have this, it connects to this neuron, it connects to that neuron, and eventually that's why you'll just get A equals Z, right? Eventually you'll go through the whole alphabet as you're building that neural pathway. But eventually we're really when our thinking and our brain it's a supercomputer, if you really think about it, it eventually will just skip right to Z. And so we have to understand in these types of populations and populations that experience high level traumas too, and you said that high level needs, they're having to use that neural pathway so often, so frequently, it becomes very, very ingrained. It becomes very strong and solidified because it's being used daily, right? Or multiple times a day. It's just being used so often that way of thinking and those types of experiences just becomes so defaulted that it becomes difficult to see that there's any other way of thinking. They did a study on animals. I apologize for anybody. I didn't do it, but for anybody that that's a thing, and I get it. But I'll be real. It was animals that they exposed them to stress, right? So they obviously triggered the release of cortisol, the stress hormone, those types of things. And they noticed after 21 days that like the brain, its strength, its activity, it was significantly diminished after just 21 days of stress. And it is that withering, it is that diminishment of the activity and the strength between those neurons that really creates what's essentially like neural rigidity, which really is a way that you can think about why it's hard to think new thoughts when you've right, like you want to. Most people that are depressed may not want to be depressed, but it's really hard to not be, and that's that neuro withering. It's just like the resources in our brain for even attempting to make some of these changes that we need in our life just may not be there. And so our standard approaches, especially with pharmacology, just may not be meeting that need. It takes some time, which could be frustrating, commitment levels, people forgetting. There's a lot of different barriers that make standard day-to-day long-term pharmacology very difficult. There's tolerance, there's resistant levels, there's a whole bunch of stuff that kind of goes into it. And from that regards, psychedelics and ketamine specifically combats that. They're short term and they do a lot of work in a short amount of time. We experience very quick, within an hour or two, very quick change in mood. And that same study that saw the diminishment and the withering of our neurons after one dose of ketamine kind of undid that and kind of reset the brain back to pre-21 days. Now, it doesn't mean that when ketamine wears off, everything's good. We could pendulum back to where we were, right? But it does show us that for a period of time, very quickly, ketamine has the ability, and some of the other psychedelics we're better understanding have the ability to jumpstart and give the brain and the neurons what it needs to have the tools. And this is the important part, to learn how to think differently. It doesn't give you the new thoughts. It gives you the tools to really mean that the effort that we put into it is meaningful effort. Where a lot of people that are trying with treatment resistant depression, trauma, PTSD, anxiety, they've tried and they haven't felt a tremendous amount of results, and that further keeps them in the cycle because now they feel badly about themselves. They feel hopeless. And ketamine and psychedelics have the opportunity to jumpstart that again. So that's really what separates it from what maybe be our current standard approaches that just have not been effective for these populations.
Well, I also want to say, like, there's a stigma around mental health care here for a lot of people, but particularly in military and law enforcement. So, how does this impact the availability for people to actually seek treatment? And what are the biggest barriers that prevent veterans and first responders from accessing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy?
Well, I mean, you hit it, right? The stigma around even asking for help continues, and that's unfortunate. And we continue to try to break down that barrier. And unfortunately, for many different factors, these treatments themselves carry their own stigma. So we're trying to also break down those things, right? We're trying to break down the stigma that these are, right, like drugs, that these are going to have negative impacts on people being able to perform and function in their day to day, let alone their jobs. And so, in this regards, we're fighting twice as hard to break down stigma. One, for the populations themselves to feel empowered to ask for treatment, and then when they do that, right, breaking down the stigma and the barriers to the treatments that they're able to access. And unfortunately, what we're facing is that's not necessarily just around psychedelics. I mean, I work with a lot of, like you said, law enforcement and a lot of different departments, FAA, right? There's a lot of different organizations that still have very, very rigid policies around standard pharmacology, right? Like even your standard stuff uh, has people scared to reach out because certain diagnoses or certain medications could ground someone that has an FAA pilot license. There's certain police departments that have very rigid review processes. If a law enforcement officer has to be prescribed even standard pharmacology, Zoloft, Lexapro, and it's all around safety and liability, but it's hopefully around safety first. And so I get it. So right, so we're still facing those barriers, those kind of long, not really fully understanding how pharmacology and mental health can help veterans and first responders and law enforcement be safer, not that they make them less safe. And then you add in a psychedelic and you just blow that exponentially farther trying to well, if you don't think Lexapro is safe, I'm certain you're not going to think that ketamine's safe, although they both are. So that I think that's a barrier that we're having right now. So
Mhm.
it's just a continued conversation about breaking down some of those barriers that those folks need to, which is why when they do finally access or they do finally find a way to get in there, why they're struggling a little bit, right? Because it's been a long time to get there, and so they're coming in with a lot.
Yeah.
They're coming in with people not feeling that they're not understood. So finding people again, and whether it's first responders, whether it's veterans, and certainly whether it's psychedelics, it's understanding each in their own. But we have to fully understand how they mingle with each other too. So we have to make sure that if and this is my biggest thing, and this is my biggest like soap opera, right? Like if we are going to ask people to trust us, to come to us, we have to be able to give them that. So we can't
Mhm.
say come to us for ketamine for trauma and then not be able to help them when the trauma surfaces. I think that is a disservice beyond ethics, beyond criminality. Like I just believe that is just so it's just I can't fathom that, right? And the same thing with first responders and vets. I applaud everybody that wants to help that population. What that means is then go learn, right? And grow and find opportunities to get to be able to. We can't just say we understand we can help vets and first responders because
Mhm.
of all the populations they're probably, and I don't mean this in a negative way, they're ones that probably combat trust issues the most, right? Or
Yep.
up there. Maybe not the most, but they're up there. And
Yeah.
so to to consider what they go through internally and externally to get to the point where they're now in your office and then you don't know how to help them is going to further quiet them. It's going to cause them to take even longer, if ever. And I've had these clients say, I never thought I would do it again after my first time. I have two just within the last couple of weeks that came directly from their EAP program saying, these people had no clue. I didn't even use the rest of my benefits. I'll just pay for therapy at this point
Mm-hmm.
for somebody to understand me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a barrier too to these populations. Is it takes more than just saying we do it. If we're
Mm-hmm.
going to ask them to come trust us, we have to be able to give them what we're asking. And I just don't find that to be true with a lot of, or not a lot, but in the psychedelic space. And unfortunately, I don't find it to be true all the time in people that say um, that they specialize or they treat first responders and vets,
Yeah.
whether that's traditionally or non-traditionally. They're, yeah. So
Well, unless you've been through a situation where you yourself have experienced what it feels like in your nervous system, in your psychology, to not feel safe on a very like every moment to moment basis to that degree, you're not going to hold to the standard of like, it is so much more important in an alignment to really hold absolute safety in every single nuance of safety that you can, in the way that your bedside manner, the way you're intaking every single thing. And for me, that's why I work with most as a massage therapist. That's why everyone I work with has gone through trauma. I am a trauma informed therapist, and I teach that for massage therapists because all the people I've worked with, and it's because of my own experience for my own personal journey of like, oh my gosh, when you actually experience it and you come to the other side, this is what I needed. This is what no one did for me. This is what no one understood. And I think that's one of the things that makes you different in your background in being able to really help that. And not only that, but also set the standard and the bar potentially for other training protocols for what people need to see, these nuances they may not understand. And the well-meaning clinicians too, that maybe they just didn't have that experience in their journey, which is kind of nice to have someone that hasn't, like I years my journey, working with psychotherapists, like it's nice when you're in this session, you're like, they haven't actually had a significant amount of trauma in their life. Like it's great because they're regulated and I have someone to model after and help me work through it. But it's a little bit different than a different dynamic when you have someone who's gone through it themselves and can to walk alongside you.
yeah, I definitely agree. Again, I'm not here to, say that people that aren't first responders or vets can't help them, right?
Exactly.
Trust me, I've had an experience where even with, a female vet that experienced, military sexual trauma, I had another professional say, "You're a male, you can never help a female that's gone through that." And I said, "I don't think that was fair." And then to be quite frank, I
Yeah.
don't even know if I want to continue this conversation because I have trauma informed. I tell my females, I'm a male, and if that makes you uncomfortable, I will pair. I
Mhm.
am very aware of it. So I do understand. I don't know what it feels like to experience it, but I do
Yeah.
understand how it impacts them because I've
Yeah.
listened. So I'm mindful of that, right? And I say at any time, and I position myself in a room, and I always do these things to make sure that they're comfortable. So for someone to look at me and say, "You can't possibly," I don't like that, right? So I don't necessarily believe, right, that you have to be a first responder or vet in order to treat them, but you do
Right.
have to understand, learn, listen, see, use a bunch of different things to be able to effectively. So I definitely believe knowing what we don't know, being willing to say, I don't understand this, so I need help, I need guidance, I need supervision will help us get there. But I do agree from a psychedelic perspective, you mentioned this in the last episode, that I do think again, therapists that do this, I believe, can be very effective without journeying themselves. I still think they can be very effective with good training and listening and learning and hearing about people sharing what they experience. I still think it can be very, very effective if you take the training, right? You can't just walk in and say, I get it, right? But I do
Hmm.
agree that it just kind of takes it up another notch or a couple
Yeah.
when you have talked the talk and you have walked the walk and you do
Yeah.
know what it feels like to be in the military or first responder. You do know how the medicine feels inside of you. It doesn't mean it's going to feel the same for everybody, but
Right.
having some kind of common understanding between each other can be very powerful as well. So,
Yeah,
agreed. Hmm?
absolutely. So, as far as the policy changes or funding shifts that need to happen to make it more accessible, what do you think we need to see and what's coming up?
Yeah, so we need to make it more accessible. One of the things that I think really benefits from psychedelics from standard pharmacology, which is why we need to look at it. Even within the field, there's somewhat of a debate like are these altered states of consciousness really required to be effective? And so this is where we're seeing like psychedelic levels versus microdosing, and ketamine. We don't really use the word microdosing, we use the word psycholytic versus psychedelic, but it's the same thing. It's having the benefits of the medicine in like a neuroscience, neurostructural kind of perspective without the need or right to have the psychedelic journey. And I think we need to continue to have that
Yeah.
dialogue, and we do need to look at that. However, with this population specifically, I do think that's where we gain and why we find it to be really effective for them compared to standard pharmacology and standard approaches. It goes back to not just the rigidity of the thinking, but the rigidity of the defense mechanisms, the ego, the definity or the rigidity of the compartmentalization and the walls that we put in place in order to be successful in our jobs. We have to use those so often that they get really, really, really rigid. If we look at internal family systems, we look at, you mentioned that you're a protector, right? Our protector part
Mhm.
in these populations, not only are there like in the general sense, we have to realize and what they truly do, what these individuals truly do. They run towards the fire, into the fire. They run towards the gunshots, right? So their protector part has even bigger burden, if that's a word that we use in internal family systems. Their protector parts are burdened even more so than protector parts, especially in trauma. Again, those parts become even more burdened. So the thing that I think is really why we need to increase access to these innovative things is because of those altered states of consciousness. I do believe that having something that is able to safely, now we have to work with the first responder and the vet to feel comfortable surrendering that
Yes.
control. And that's a whole piece that goes into when I train therapists. Like our prep is a lot longer with first responders and vets because we really have to work a little bit harder and a little bit longer with that protector part, with kind of lowering or increasing the willingness to be open and vulnerable. And a lot of them are scared. They don't want all those calls and all those traumas that they've put
Mhm.
away to be okay at their job all come flooding out. So we really have to support our first responders and vets longer, maybe, than we don't. But that's what this medicine's so great. That altered state of consciousness lowers those defense mechanisms. It
Mhm.
softens, doesn't necessarily blow them apart. Sometimes it does, right? But it softens those rigid compartments and walls that we've placed around the things that they can't even. They've done it. This is one of the things, especially that they were retired. They've done it so long.
Mhm.
I don't. They forgot where the key to the door is, and B, they probably don't even remember for a lot of times what's even behind the door anymore because it's been in there so long. I have
Mhm.
an officer, a law enforcement officer right now that the first session was just bawling. He's like, I don't
Mhm.
even know why I'm bawling. I can't even give you a reason. And I said, because there probably isn't a reason. It's
Yeah.
probably a crap ton of little reasons, right? So there's probably
Yeah.
not one singular thing you can say it was that call. For some, it is. I've met with a lot that's like, it definitely was this day at this time in this call. For
Yeah.
some, it's not because they just lost track of even what's behind there. So I do think making that access. So we have to campaign for more access. We have to campaign for some more FDA approval. Another significant barrier is financial access. And unfortunately, until the FDA does make its presence, and while we don't always want to, too many chiefs or too many hands in the cookie jar can really mess things up. We
Mhm.
we do unfortunately need that, right? that could really help speed up payers getting on board. You and I and I on some other ventures have been really involved in like going to payers and advocating even without this. Like this is something that needs to be invested in. But until we solve that piece, it's still going to be very limited access to people that really, really need this. So having workers' comp programs picking this up and it being an approved
Mhm.
um, procedure for workers' comp, EAP programs possibly funding this,
Mhm.
um, private insurances, Medicaid, Medicare, these types of things have to get on board as well. And
Yeah.
we have to continue in order for um, even if with ketamine it's accessible, but it's not
Yeah.
financially accessible to enough people right now.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something we have to look at too. That's what needs to change for this population,
Mhm.
is some softening of the rigid policies that they face around what they're allowed and what kind of treatment they're allowed to get. So seeing that that's not making them unsafe, we need some continued support from lawmakers and legislators to legitimize these treatments. And then once that's in or around at the same time, we need payers to fund
Mhm.
what these individuals deserve as part of their healthcare coverage and their mental health
Mhm.
coverage to
Yeah.
navigate the jobs that they're doing for us, for our community, and for our country.
Absolutely. And anyone out there that is either a first responder, in the military, veteran, anyone that your family members, this is something that this conversation, like, please share this podcast. Share this information. You can get involved. You can come to the local community psychedelic Central PA Psychedelic Society meetings. You can get involved. And this is where voices are really important, especially voices that are able to stand up and say, this is my experience. So I'd love to share. We're going to end here with some stories that some of the clients that you've worked with, but also we will share the link to the WGAL interview that we had with some of your patients as well, and some other
Powerful.
p- powerful stories. And I think that's just really important. Like, it's not, I've been saying to people, not just in this field, but in the holistic health field too, with integrative medicine, people who are still being looked at like you have two heads when you do something that's a little bit outside the box. And I'm like, don't silence yourself, speak up, and not in a way that's evangelical, not in a way that's like, this is better, because that's more polarizing, thinking. I say we need to really just stand up for what really has worked for us and open up conversations, open up curiosity. And that is what's going to create change. So share with us some stories that you've had.
And just really quickly before we go in those stories, I think that
Mhm.
was really powerful. I talk to my clients all the time that we don't necessarily have to tell somebody that, or right, I'm not here to badmouth standard pharmacology, right? I'm
Right.
not, and to be honest, one of the things I haven't highlighted is one of the things that's great about ketamine is it works in conjunction with standard pharmacology, especially Spravato, the nasal spray. It's actually, when they did studies, they did a study with Spravato and an antidepressant against a placebo and antidepressant. And in some studies, it showed a significant difference. So again, it works together. And so in this
Yes.
field, we don't have to say, in order to be a supporter of psychedelics, that we're
Yes.
throwing away decades and decades of people that have found standard pharmacology and traditional therapy to be effective. What we're
Yes.
saying is, for those that's not enough, for those that it isn't effective for, we can't just say, well, that's it, we gave it our best try, because it's not our best try. Our best try is to continue to say this works great and has for X amount of years for X amount of people. Could there be something else that we can add to it as well? And so that's just my last kind of soap opera. To your point, is right, it does take people to say this is okay, but obviously
Mhm.
we'd still be using courier pigeons if someone didn't say, like, could we make a phone? And we wouldn't have
Mhm.
smartphones if someone said I was cool with the flip phone, right? Like,
Mhm.
doesn't mean that for a period of time the flip phone didn't change everybody's life, but it meant someone finally said, could we make it a little bit bigger? Could we make
Mhm.
it better? I don't know. So thank you for highlighting curiosity. And again, we don't have to be in competition with each other to say we're
Mhm.
all trying. I hope That's not always the case, but for people like myself, you, and some others, we all have the same goal in mind, and that's simply to help people. It's not to get our way versus your way. We won, you won, money, names. We just need to help people. And if there's a
Mhm.
way to help them in a different way, we got to. But anyway, so with some of that, yeah. So got to share some stories. You got to check out this clip on CBS 21. She is by far one of the. She's just a phenomenal individual that has shared her story. Combat, combat medic. Lot of death. A lot of darkness, and she shares in her experience. Again, I think it's some of that psychedelic experience that really allows that to surface. And she shares. I don't want to share her story, so check out the YouTube.
Sure.
She talks about it a little bit, but just one of those types of experiences for her, right, was she was kind of having some of this out of body kind of disconnected, experience, spiritualistic kind of psychedelic kind of journey. Her first kind of session was with this little fern, uh, and we named it Fernalicious. It's our nickname for her fern. And she started crying after her journey. She started crying while she was telling me this. And again, I was just curious. I just was curious about why she was crying. Felt really bad because all the black and the darkness, the trees. She saw trees, she saw leaves, but they were all dead, and they kind of infected the little fern and killed the little fern. She was really sad by that. Over a period of time, all the work she did an incredible amount of work for herself, but towards the end of her journey, Fernalicious, when it would show up, would actually do quite the opposite. It would shoot color out into the world, and it would brighten the trees. And what she talks about it in CBS, the news clip, that her world, just she experiences colors like she never thought she would experience them before. Again, this old, rigid, soaked, tried and true, the world is a dark, ugly place, was gripping for her. And she was
Yeah.
very, to the point of suicidality.
Mhm.
And all this did was give a potential, right, to think differently about the world, as she did through her little fern, right? And for her, right, she went from the world having the control over coloring her life versus her internal self. That's what the fern really does exist. It's her spirit, it's her light, and it actually changed her ability to see that she has the ability to color the world versus the world, right, diminishing her light, right? And it was just so powerful. And we see similar experiences. I currently am working with a client that has similar kind of darkness. There's not a lot of objectivity to it, a lot of sadness, a lot of self criticism. And in one of her recent journeys, she saw herself on a cloud. And the first time the cloud was just kind of all over the place. She couldn't make sense of it. And the second time she was on the cloud, a little bit calmer, and it was shooting out, I'll say professionally, shooting out a rainbow. And again, I just was curious. I think I knew my interpretation, very similar to the fern, but I didn't tell her that. I said, "What do you think it was?" She says, "I think, in her own words, that it meant that, like, even though there's darkness still around her, a little different than the fern, but even though there might still be darkness around her, in her little bubble, she can still be as beautiful as a rainbow."
Yeah.
And so that's helped her in her life. She hasn't focused so much on, like, going out and adding that rainbow to the world, but it's given her comfort that despite all of that, she can still, in her own little space, still have a lot of beauty and fun within the
Yeah.
chaos. So
Yes.
these are just some of the examples, right, of some of the experiences that I believe make the level of psychedelic medicine versus just the microdose or the psycholytic powerful. It creates these experiences that the client has the ability and the work to try to make sense and meaning of. And when they grab onto that meaning and they grab onto that hope and that purpose, it's such a powerful thing. Anything can
Mhm.
be accomplished with a little bit of hope and a little bit of meaning. And that's all we're doing with clients, is we're just helping them see that what they've come to believe about themselves and the world isn't as concrete and as absolute as it's come to feel. We've given them the tools to say there could be other ways to think about it. And if you make enough choices and you practice that enough, you might even see yourself in the world a little differently.
Yeah.
So those are just a couple. Those are a couple. My own personal story I've journeyed, and it's been pretty remarkable myself. So everything stuff shows up differently, but to kind of summarize, I think it is those experiences of why we owe it to this population to understand why they have difficulties, and then understand what the medicine does. This is why education is important. And because when we understand that rigid protective defense mechanism that is absolutely essential to them to not just survive their job emotionally, but probably survive their job literally,
Mhm.
right? Has become so strong at what it does that we need something pretty strong itself, pretty, innovative to help attune to that, right? So
Yes.
again, we have to have flexible models and flexible approaches to flexible people because not
Yeah.
every one person is the same.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And these stories, guys, these are just one of many, many, many. And this is the type of
yeah.
thing this type of thing can't be silenced. I mean, it will continue to grow and with people's experiences and with a good clinician, good training, and good education. So thank you guys so much for listening. In the next episode, we will continue to dive deeper into ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So thank you guys again. And thank you so much, Dr. Tony.
Oh, anytime. I'll talk about it forever. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. If you love this podcast, share it with others and leave us a review. Your reviews help us more than you know and supports us continuing to make episodes and being heard from all over the world. You can also follow the link in our show notes to submit a topic that you would like to hear on the show.